to Mustafah, who I'm really thrilled to have in the room here with us today. And it's a funny story how we actually met, because I think it was last semester or the one before, I had two fashion designers presenting here, Benjamin and Serhat of GmbH. I don't know who of you were for that lecture here last semester? A few, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And when I approached them, obviously for the website and for Instagram, I needed a photograph. And the photograph that I got was for Mustafah. So I had to approach Mustafah, hey, can I get the rights or can I take that picture? But then when I contacted him, I saw his work. I was like, wow, this is incredible. I didn't expect this type of photographer behind a portrait shot. And then we kind of spoke. At the time, you were, I think, in Italy on some residency in going through an archive of a very well-known Italian photographer. And I always thought, okay, there must be another occasion where maybe I can invite him. And this is actually now, this is today, you're here. You're also the very first photographer joining Juxtapositions. We had all kinds of disciplines here, all within the creative realm. So from artists to curators and from designers to architects and musicians and so forth and so on, and writers. But the first graphic designer, so I'm very grateful. So you are based in Berlin. You're a photographer and you're a director. You're originally from New York, I believe. And you have worked over a decade, I believe, also on the human impact of climate change by bringing kind of your visual stories together, and also to kind of rather large-scale installations. There's certain recurring themes. One of the big ones that I was totally mesmerized is that of water. I'm sure we will hear quite a bit of it tonight. You won a lot of awards and you work with a lot of prestigious newspapers such as the New York Times, the Time, and the Spiegel. That said, oh, by the way, I totally forgot to introduce. Did you guys make it? Good. My tech team thought with me. So that said, I would like a warm applause for Mustafah Abdulaziz. And the stage is yours. And off you go.
Can you hear me?
Yep,
okay.
Loud and clear.
Wonderful. And you want me to be right here? Ideally.
You can move around.
I can wander.
Then I move around.
All right, challenge accepted. All right, I'm going to put a timer on. Hi, everyone. My name is Mustafah. I'm a photographer, a documentary photographer, to be precise, from Brooklyn, New York. And I've been living in Berlin for the past 11, 12 years. It blurs together after a period of time. But before I dive into things, someone gave me a really good piece of advice so that I stay on my marks and I stay on timing. So I'm going to put a timer on my phone. So just give me a second. Don't rush me. Stop rushing me. All right, 45, there we go. All right. So I'm going to show you approximately 3 main works today. The fourth work is kind of something that I threw in at the very last minute, right before I came here, just because I really wanted to share it. Oftentimes, as photographers, we work alone. It's a very lonely profession, even if you're surrounded by people. And the reason for that is that the way in which you interact with the world when you look through a camera is actually a way in which you look at yourself. To photograph is to work on yourself. To photograph is to look inside in order to look outside. The great photographers that I have always admired, that have inspired me, and in many ways led me to become a photographer, were ones who developed as human beings simultaneously as they developed their work. So I wanted to show you chronologically the work that I have been focusing on that relates oftentimes to my own life, but not as direct as to be a diary or a journal, but in many ways they are an expression of my internal world and my feelings towards what is happening to our planet. We oftentimes think that the topics that affect our planet are out there, that they are happening to someone else or somewhere else, that they are abstract in some way. And I want to show you a way of approaching an art form, in this case, just simple photographs that were taken on a medium format camera, not a very fancy camera format, very simple, rather difficult, in the sense of it's not the smartest tool to use for something like this. But I want to show you a way of approaching something, a way of seeing, and a way of looking inward in order to look outward. So I call this presentation the anthropogenic photograph. Now, the reason why I named it this way is because the focus of my work is about the time we live in. The focus of my work is about what we are doing to the planet and what that actually means towards our priorities to ourselves. This is not something that we do out there. This is something that we do on a daily basis, in the things we buy, in the places we go, and how we view other cultures, and what we think is important and what we think is unimportant. My project is about water, but water is simply the medium that allows me to reflect, much like a mirror, other behaviors that encapsulate what we are doing to our planet. So I'm going to show you the first part of the work. Where it comes from, I'm going to kind of meander in and out with this narrative, but I'm going to express where I come from. I grew up one of 6 kids. I was extraordinarily shy. I had a lot of attention problems. I had 2 different parts of my upbringing that was split and very difficult for me to rectify, being half black, half white with an Arab name, growing up in one part of New York, going to school in another. And so I felt myself split between worlds. And I think we can all relate to this idea that we all seek belonging in all groups and forms in which we pursue our vocations or our jobs or our lives or our passions. But for me, the camera was never something that was present as a child. What was always present was this feeling of an outsider. And I always desired to be on the inside. And what does it mean to be on the inside? Well, for me, it's a fantasy. It was this idea of, I want to be close to life. I want to look at life much like I used to watch Indiana Jones, right there. I wanted my nose right up against the screen. I wanted the world that felt confusing and overwhelming, and in many ways, extreme. I wanted to make it mean something to me. I wanted to see myself in it. So the work that I'm showing you, even while it's dealing with climate change, it is my way of existing and evolving as a person. So I will show you 3 parts of that evolution. And this is the first part. I call it water. And water kind of is the umbrella term for the photographic work that encapsulates over a decade of photography. Oh, wow, I'm ruining the photograph by standing in front of it. That looks at human behavior around the world. This human behavior, this mirror, this idea of looking inside to look out, are questions that I pose to myself. What does it mean to lose a loved one? This is a man along the Ganges, a river that is spiritually important for millions of Hindus across India, who pilgrimage to this one spot called Allahabad, the site of the largest gathering of human beings, something like 65, 70 million people, as National Geographic reckoned. And this is in the aftermath of that huge celebration of life and death and spirituality. And this is one man who traveled a considerable distance across India to burn the body of his brother, a postman. So what I tried to do is to look at small slivers of human interest stories and create parables, alliteration, to look at things that are really happening to people when it comes to the issues of water, scarcity, access to water, religion, spirituality, all these very, very abstract, large words, and make them very immediate. The metaphor. For me, I sought this metaphor out across Ethiopia, Pakistan, Somalia, Mozambique, a few countries that I looked at when I was examining the issues of water scarcity. So instead of photographing maybe perhaps a child with water in their palms or someone that is in some way suffering, I thought, what could I do that felt honest to the emotions that I have towards the world? I'm amazed by it. I'm in awe of it. There's power in that observation, in that way of seeing. So I looked for a metaphor to express what I felt. And I looked for it in different pockets as I constructed this undertone throughout the work. Scarcity. access to water. Who's responsible for it? Who pays? Women and children. Women and children are predominantly responsible for gathering water across the world in all areas where it is either scarce, non-existent, or poisoned, or brackish, or unhealthy. That means that women and children cannot go to school, have upward mobility, higher education. They are forced to trek 3-4 hours across very difficult terrains, whether it's mountainous regions here in Nigeria, or it's in the deserts of Somalia. They must put their very singular health at risk for the betterment of the group. So they must, in some way, lose the opportunity of life in order to pursue the immediacy of life, water. And this photograph, for me, I only discovered it, I believe, during Corona, when I was going through my negatives, when I had stopped traveling, and I was looking to understand what 10 years of photographic work actually meant to make. And I think Corona was possibly the best thing to ever happen to my career, if I'm being honest. It forced me to stop. It forced me to look backwards, to look forwards. And I found this photograph hiding, oh wow, that's super annoying. Someone should have said something. I found this photograph while I was quite upset about some things in life, and I felt vulnerable. I felt like I wanted to go back into the places that meant something to me. And so I was searching in some way through my own negatives, like I was revisiting the places that I had documented. And I came across this, and I realized that is the metaphor that I did not have the wisdom to understand. I had the knowledge, the desire to make it, to report on it, to share it, but I lacked the wisdom to understand its potency, its power. Right there, in this one photograph, I found a way to express all women that carry the burden of water in a beautiful way. The reality of life mixed with the tragedy of beauty. These two things I find to be most fascinating in the creative process. The small slivers of detail that reveal an emotive quality while at the same time, hopefully, you got it? While at the same time expressing something more than just a reportage on one particular place. This project is not about just Pakistan, because climate change is not just about Pakistan. This project is not just about southern Ethiopia. They form puzzle pieces of the whole. And I only came across this idea of forming pieces of the whole when I began as a photographer by wandering around a bookstore in my late teens, procrastinating. And I pulled down a book by Richard Avedon, a portrait photographer. Perhaps you have heard of him. He's one of the most incredible portrait photographers of the 21st century. And this moment was my introduction to photography. In some ways, a lot of the photography that I have made, whether they are portraits, whether they are projects, are me trying to justify that feeling that I had when I saw Richard Avedon's photographs. He impressed me greatly by his exactitude, by his humanity, by the way in which he strove to explain what he felt was crucially important about his time. When I pulled that book in the American West off the shelf, what was really happening for me, now that I understand this, was that I had been given a passport. I'd been given by someone that was no longer, I don't even believe he was alive at the time I pulled it down, or he was soon to pass away. It felt like someone gave me permission that being on the outside, being the other, was actually my superpower. That's what I developed. That's what made me want to go there. Not because that particular person had any intimate connection to my life, but the belief that photography can be an expression of humanism. It can be a way in which you can shape your life in any method and form to reflect what others experience, take it on, and take responsibility to do something about it. Here you see a boy in a drought-stricken tree. I did not want to resort in the project that has taken up a considerable amount of my life to simple photographs. I wanted this otherworldly atmosphere to permeate the work, no matter where it is. This is from Germany during the floods. You'll see that all these different countries are being mixed in. You'll notice that you can't tell where one is. Is it southern Ethiopia, Germany? the United States, California. That's because it doesn't matter. The whole idea of the work stems in some way from this idea that our borders and our prerogatives about what is defined as meaningful to us no longer is relevant in the 21st century. And what I mean by that is that a flood in Germany is a human interest story. It is something that perhaps to us here feels more real. But the issues of scarcity in Ethiopia should feel just as real to us. And that is a demand that I tried to place upon my viewer in the manner in which I construct the work. That's why there are no borders or titles. These things are no longer useful for a work like this. It's a human story. Any photograph that looks at the pain, the difficulty, the excitement, the joy of others is in some way a reflection of the capacity of the individual that perceives it. This is what makes documentary photography, to me, one of the most potent forms and threads of the art form. Humanism is, I would define as my personal belief, as close to spirituality as I can take it. In order to apply humanism in a responsible way, this work examines all the manners in which we construct our environment, from the scale in which we prioritize excess, entertainment, pleasure, in an unusual manner, to what that does when it depletes the resources we depend upon, the lines that divide the past that we cannot return to, and the future that is to come. We are moving into a century where the population of our planet, the resources of our planet, will outstrip our ability to satisfy them. So in some way, the work that I am making, as I made it throughout the decade, as I reached that point of Corona, as I think back upon the origins of my own career, I realize is truly about one topic. It is almost like I wish to photograph for our children's children, to show them how we thought. The 35 million people that live in Chongqing, and the one man that you see present, waking up in the morning to appreciate the water. But behind that layer is a city that has placed an extreme amount of stress on the Yangtze. Nearly 1 billion people live along its basin. I try to find these small little symbols, and I try to replicate them. In replication, in alliteration, in sequence, I can gain authority to command what I wish to express. I believe that in any work, regardless of its medium, it behooves you to take that feeling you have, whatever it is. It could be anger, it can be disgust at the way the world is, it can be curiosity, it can be even something that's not as negative, and it can be something as simple as, I am amazed by the world around me, and take it seriously. Be proud that you possess that, for that is a responsibility that you have at the cross-section of time that will allow you to apply it to the world around you. No matter what it is, I do believe humanism can play a role both towards the development of your own vision and the betterment of humankind. The alliteration that I mentioned before, you'll notice there's some motifs in the process. Well, I had to kind of structure it in order to replicate itself. And what I mean by that is the Trinity, the idea of three. You'll notice this is a prevalent theme in a lot of the photographs. You'll notice the horizon line divides the photograph almost considerably the same throughout, whether it's Louisiana or it's India or it's Western Germany. I had to figure out what was the world of rules that I could create and break simultaneously. This gave me a great basis from which to throw like a tennis ball against a wall and figure out how to catch it, so that I can build up a manner in which my voice could be expressed. It's useful to come up with some of these games or some of these methods for yourself. They will make sense to you. Perhaps they won't make sense to a room of people, but they might make sense to one or two, and in that, you have a cascade effect. And then maybe you might hear that person express their own method back to you, influenced by your original idea, and you will then be able to learn something from their input. I believe photography, in its manner of organic development, gives a huge benefit to the way you see anything. It is not simply to look at something, but it is a manner in which to exist. Now, I want to take a moment to drink a little bit of water. Hopefully this is all making sense bit by bit. And I want to show you a work that I have not shown anyone, actually, or I have not shown the public. But the reason for that is that it takes what you just saw and almost doubles down on it. It is the second part of the work, sometimes photographed concurrently, and sometimes photographed separately, meaning that it's not the same work in some regard. But before I go into it, I do want to say that there are some photographs in here that are difficult to look at. And so if anyone feels sensitive to that, if they feel particularly vulnerable in this moment of time, I would recommend that when you see my hand go up, to look away. All right. So these photographs are almost like an inversion for me. I wanted to readdress my creative process, the one that has lasted for over a decade, by looking at all the photographs that I did not publish, all the ones that were not that were left on the table by the editors, all the ones that I was too afraid or in some ways nervous about how to use and how to express, but were in some way the flip side of the same coin that I created the other work from. The hurricanes that I studied in the American Gulf in 2018. A child suffering from diarrhea, one of the leading causes of death amongst children in the world. I think it's second or third, I believe, which is mental, absolutely mental, unnecessary. The destruction of the Amazon. We are clearing rainforest at such an incredible rate. We cannot restore it. We are burning our opportunity to survive. Just as much as we affect our planet, it will affect us in return. A man killed on a first date in a flash flood, the underestimation of the natural world. A tire burns wood in Louisiana to make room for new fields of oil exploration. And the $1 million homes are constructed on artificial lakes in Discovery Bay in California. These things happen simultaneously. We must remember that all the work that you see in here and the world that you go out into, they are not separate. They are one. What you do affects massive amounts of change in other places. That's an opportunity. An internally displaced persons camp in Somalia. In this second part, you see that it's become harsher, less personal. And in some ways, I start playing with the actual two-dimensional form of the photograph. I start focusing on literal holes of abyss. In this instance, the home and the individual, almost like cutouts, no longer present, no longer a priority. South Africa, in the Dunoon Township, dense, overpopulated, and growing, and the water resources there depleted. Scale. Scale, I think, is one of the greatest lessons I learned in the early parts of this work about how to communicate these ideas that felt nearly impossible to correlate together, to put together. Oftentimes, you'll see in the work, I play with perspective. in the sense of the physical distance between me and the thing that I am portraying, as well as the distance of it to the central idea of the photograph. A girls' school learning about cholera for the very first time. Cholera, a waterborne disease, preventable. But in Sierra Leone, there was an outbreak in 2012 and it ravaged West Africa. And it returns. Cholera was introduced back to Haiti, I believe, quite recently, through the participation, I believe, of a UN mission there. So not only that it happens there, but that our way of handling and seeing these things can also create the very things that we're trying to prevent. It is a mindset, a mentality that leads us to create these types of scenarios. This is these young girls learning for the first time what cholera is. This is their introduction to an idea of, for them, if you remember, let me kind of work backwards. If you remember when the pandemic became real to you, it became real to everyone in different ways at different times. But when there's a moment when you thought, oh shit, this is going to be something I don't understand. This feels scary. This is larger than life. What do I do? What will happen to my loved ones? That is that moment. The predominant aspect of climate will affect the equatorial regions of the world, the sea, the cities and populations along the ocean first, which will lead to a cascade effect to the more affluent areas of the world. So that feeling that I just described, we're moving more and more towards it. We are creating situations where it is more likely to happen. And at the same time, we are still playing with nature. We still do not take its power, its potency seriously. We do not respect it, and therefore that lack of respect affects all our decisions. One of the wealthiest nations on the planet, my own country, has a disgusting zoo where they make a clown out of an incredible animal that's meant to roam free. So that people, evolved monkeys, can sit in the crowd and clap their hands. And what we do not see about our own hubris, it comes back upon us. Rather than photograph the wildfire of someone's home burning and feeling this sense of aliveness to the crisis, I've sought through this second part to almost step away from the violence, to make it almost as absurd as it feels to speak about it. And find these little slivers, a group of sheep. I forget the word for a group of sheep, but there's a good word for it, like a gaggle of geese and so on. There's a good word for that. I didn't remember that. The theatricality and drama that comes with how we portray our own suffering. The news reporter that comes and stands in the rubble and speaks as though he cares. While the children, the women and daughters, scrape the bottom of brackish rivers 3 hours from their homes in southern Ethiopia. This is what we consider to be important. The second part for me is my favorite part of the work right now, because it is closest to the anger and the fury that I feel about who is meant to suffer, who matters, and who doesn't matter. Sorry, I should have warned you. I forgot this photograph was coming so soon. This is what a group, an NGO in Nigeria has as resources to address all of those villages and provide them with clean water. This is our level of seriousness that we take for the problems of those who suffer that are not in front of us. I believe those computers are not of the century. And this is what we build in China, in the Three Gorges Dam, a monolith to our own glory, power, designs. To me, it's the Death Star. To me, it's the machinations. To me, it's the ego of man. It is not just a dam that's the largest hydroelectric dam in the world. It is not just a conduit for industry and economy. What it is a symbol. This matters. And I wish to use the photographs that I make and the ways in which I make them and display them and speak about them to be a manner of a candle. You might think this problem's so big. How can one person make a difference? You might think maybe how can 5 people make a difference? How can 10? What can I do? Well, in a dark room, you need only one candle to light the way. The reason why I came here today, the reason why I'm showing you these photographs, and the reason why I'm speaking so plainly about what I care about, is I believe that you have an opportunity in all your own ways, no matter what you study, no matter what you look at, no matter what you do, to make a concise, responsible, and fair choice about what you can offer the world. If you are an architecture student, think not of sustainability in the sense of material, think larger than that. Think what makes a community want to retain a building? What are the feelings it evokes? What does it provide us beyond the obvious? That's what I wish to impart. If you're a designer and you're designing something that you truly believe that you want to offer into the world, think, is there a possibility along the way for me to make a responsible choice that helps the planet? You don't have to be like this and have an obsession about a specific way of working, or to photograph, or to do this type of thing. But you have in yourself the capacity to be that candle in your own field, in your own vocation. And to me, caring is cool. Caring is cool because giving a shit means that you give a shit about yourself, and then you can also help others. And those are the people that I've been blessed, I've been fortunate to be surrounded by along the way of making this work. Photography is a lonely process, but it is not in its essence a lonely art form. It's truly about us. There's an imperative of sensibility that frequently crosses my mind when I look at my work and I find myself dissatisfied about something within it. I try to imagine, what can I do more? What can I do better? In some ways, part 2 is my way of challenging myself, of coming to a reckoning. The last piece, or the second to last piece, is the most recent photographs that I've made in a part of the world that I've always desired to go to. But I thought if I'm going to make a photographic work within this project on climate, I should try to make it evolve. I should try to push my vision forward, do something different. And so I decided I would make a collection of photographs that form almost the third phase of the work. And I would, how to describe it? I would try to photograph the fantasy of the Arctic. When you imagine this part of the world, what you don't imagine is that it's warming 3 times as fast as the rest of the planet. What you don't imagine is a specific place. When you think of New York City, you imagine the Statue of Liberty. You can imagine the East River. You can make it real to yourself in a way that allows you to interpret and care about it. Well, the Arctic doesn't really have that. It feels nameless. It feels like an empty expanse. It feels like it is the edge of the map. So I wanted to photograph it almost like that is the fantasy, the inversions of substance and exterior, inside and out. An iceberg that has broken off, revealing its interior structure. The end of a glacier in northern Alaska, trickling down. Record low summer ice melt. A dome created by a very, very creative individual on the archipelago of Svalbard. He wanted to grow vegetables in a place where nothing grew. And yet his funding from the Norwegian government did not form and did not continue in the way he needed. So it collapsed. So you see the idea of skeleton, of structure, is now present. It's no longer about the individual. It's no longer about one person's suffering or groups. What it is about global behavior. The fishing dock of Western Greenland. This area, this dock, will change what it fishes based upon what we eat. Halibut becomes popular in Germany. They only fish halibut. Halibut gets overfished. It cannot be replenished in the biosphere. It then is affected by what we order for our plates. I want to reiterate, I said it twice, 3 times sounds perfect to me. What we do here affects what we do there. It's not separate, it is one. In this third piece, you'll notice there's a few things that were very interesting for me to play with. Scale, replication. The blood of an Inuit seal hunt is replicated in the following photograph of a mine so far in remote Alaska that it was nearly impossible for me to reach and photograph. There's only one road and it's controlled by the company. This is a lead and zinc mine. This is what people do not want you to see. This is what we require in order to fuel all these behaviors that we don't quite understand, that are leading us further and further into an unknown future. The symbolism of cutouts again, shapes, ovals, inversions. And then clarity, another glacier that ends in a puddle. A lot of this ice that we are losing in Switzerland, in the Alps, in the Americas, we are at risk of not getting it back. That means that not just the issues of water affect us, but that this plays a vital role in everything else that happens for us and that we are a part of. This is the point of what I've been trying to make, a reflection of priority, life, death, pain. Its proximity to us, its symbol, how we're surrounded by it. This is a heat wave in the Arctic. I went there to photograph what I fantasized about, that I imagined, all the beautiful things that you imagine going to the Arctic for, icebergs and all this. And instead what I got was a bloody heat wave. One of the most disappointing trips of my entire year was to this place. And yet it's one of the most important places for me in the project. Svalbard heating, going from -15 to 16 degrees overnight, is a bit fucked up. The Greenland ice sheet, the grandeur of the Arctic, and its reality. The iron ore mine in northern Sweden. I believe they just discovered, as of this year, or perhaps end of last year, rare earth metals in the same area. So what you're seeing here is that they're digging underneath the city of Kiruna. So much so that they have to move some of the city to get more. Because our appetite for endless growth, endless consumption, means that even the people that work in the mine, they gotta move for more of it. This is the last photograph of the 3 works. It's of a very odd perspective, but I fancy it quite much. What's my time?
10 minutes.
Cool. All right, I'll show you something else. Before I show you something else, I want to kind of make a disclaimer. What I'm about to show you, has nothing to do with everything else I just showed you. I just want to show it. One of the things that got me into photography, Richard Avedon, he's a portrait photographer. Check him out. In the American West, women, he worked in-house for, I think, as the photographer for Saint Laurent. He's an absolute legend. And he's one of my favorite photographers. And he did a series of portraits throughout the American West looking at, a beekeeper, looking at a child that just won a what do you call it, a fair, a contest, a rodeo, not a circus, no, what is it? Carnival. It's like a child that just won a contest at a carnival, and now he's displaying his badge. What he was making portraits of were the way that people wished to be seen. He photographed the vulnerability in the way that we all share and have. And I found this to be so very powerful. At the particular time that I discovered Avedon, I felt insecure about everything, about myself, about the world around me, about what I was going to do with my life. And when I saw his work, it gave me a great validation. It made me think, I need to look at others. I need to stop being concerned with myself. I need to perhaps go out there and explore and not know and be a guest and ask questions. Richard Avedon is by far the reason I am a photographer today. And so I view Avedon as the pinnacle of portraits. You're not about to see Richard Avedon, by the way. Sorry, this is not where this is going. But it's my weakest, I believe, my weakest link is portraits. So as Jung said, in your weakness is your project, and this is what I'm working on right now. It's a series of portraits that is almost non-directional. And what I mean by that is that I am photographing for the sake of looking. I want to look at people in order to see what I can learn about myself and about them and what I can create through the process of the beautiful form that is photography. These are portraits in South Africa of Caleb, who lost his leg in a great white shark attack. And I asked Caleb, who was very enthusiastic and very lovely, what he imagined the portrait to be and what he wanted to do. And he brought me tons of clothes. He was so into the portrait. He was like, anything, whatever you want. And I thought, the one thing that I do remember from learning how to surf poorly, is that going from the lying position to upright is incredibly hard. And so I said, Caleb, why can you do that for me? And he just, what a legend, he just did it over and over and over again. And what happened is something really remarkable. The statuesque form of the body takes on this extraordinary posture. The disc thrower, you'll notice the arm, kind of canted, becomes a replication of the leg. The human form almost echoing the mechanical. The extraordinary strength that he exhibits when he rises fully. For me, this is fascinating. For me, this is my form of figuring out what does portraiture mean to me. So as I mentioned before, photography being a way in which to develop yourself while simultaneously looking at the world, this is a very personal way of me developing my eye right now. But not just the human form, but the form of still lifes. Things that are intransient, where time affects the object, rather than my moment in time affecting it. Youth, the exterior, an emotive quality. I'm searching for otherness and atmosphere in all portraits that I make. Sometimes I don't know what that atmosphere is, and so I have to create a new process to discover it. I think pre-planning is the best stuff comes in discovery. The coolest stuff comes when you make mistakes, but that you are wise enough to recognize what it could possibly be. So I'm looking at all ways of the skin, the exterior form, the internal world, the things that are hidden from the photograph, and what they mirror. The different ways one object might appear, the different ways one person might appear. The singular, This is another portrait that I really enjoyed making. This is Jose. Jose used to be a child soldier in Angola, and he ran about 2,000 kilometers to freedom. That's an incredible feat. He ran and ran and ran and ran, and now he runs up. I don't know if anyone's been to Cape Town. There's a beautiful mountain called Table Mountain that overlooks the bay, and he runs up this every day. And I wanted to make a portrait of him in a way that echoes his remembrance of this past, but at the same time expresses the strength of his present. He runs in order to be free, because in movement is when he felt free. For me, this is what portraiture means. You're looking at my experimentation, my work table. Those are my photographs. I hope you enjoyed them.
Thank you so much. This was very, very moving, very touching. It correlated in many ways also to the title of this lecture series. It's called Juxtapositions, and you named it iterations, I think, parallels, but kind of basically also juxtaposing things. And I think it was very inspiring to see how you did this on this very common topic of water and then delving into the other ones. I have 1,000,001 questions already for you, but you are in the room as well, and I would like to give you the first hand. Questions or comments or feedbacks from you guys. Who dares to break the ice? This is the moment. Don't worry, no such thing as a stupid question. Yes, please. Thank you for breaking the ice.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed this talk and looking at something and became like a moving picture in the sense of, like, yeah, it was a great student in it. And my question is like, I guess you travel a lot because those pictures were like from all over the planet. And I was wondering if you say, okay, now I go to southern Ethiopia and I go to this specific place, or if you, I don't know, you're somewhere and you talk to a person and this person's like, oh yeah, I heard this and this, like, if you plan, or how do you not plan? And maybe there's a second question, maybe this is kind of the same. How do you approach people? Because you take photos of a lot of people. How do you approach them? Like, are you with them for a day and then you take one photo, or is it like you have this 1 minute, you take a shot, you're like, hey, can I use this? Or, yeah, I would be interested.
Cool. What's your name?
Lawrence.
Lawrence, nice to meet you, Lawrence. Thank you for your question. So the first part is how do I plan for each of the trips, and the second one is how do I approach people in order to photograph them, right? The first part is that I was out of necessity. When I began the work, it was nearly impossible to get someone to fund it. I had a crazy idea, but I didn't have a proof of concept. And so I applied to an organization, a journalistic organization in Washington, D.C. for my first grant, and that was for Sierra Leone, for the cholera outbreak. And I decided I would choose cholera as the catalyst, as the very first step, because it was an example of a first instance of human contact with water, meaning that if you, it's life or death, let's say that. And that importance was an imperative that I thought would compel people to understand that this matters. And from that very extreme entry, everything else kind of cascaded across time. When you have one idea, oftentimes when you develop it, you'll have really good second and third and fourth ideas. Because once you start working within the rhythm, some things become clear what you need to do and what you're not doing. And what I try to do in these moments is to allow myself to record all the instances where that happens. So I'm constantly taking notes on my phone and constantly taking notes in my notebook about random things as I'm working, because you never know when they're going to play a role. So after Sierra Leone, I realized I needed to photograph something else that was life or death. but I needed it to not come from a disease outbreak. I needed to photograph what does it mean for someone to look at water and have their spiritual connection to life be present. And I thought, well, where is that? It's actually present in many places, but the Ganges River was one where I thought, okay, the Ganges, people would already have a pretty solid notion of, that connection. And so I really wouldn't need to explain the idea. So therefore, I can look at it as tableau, or I can look at it as a scene. So in this way, each idea cascades into the next oftentimes, and sometimes against each other. I mean, the Arctic only existed as an application because it was the one place that scared the shit out of me. And I was like, why not apply for a fellowship for the place that makes me the most afraid? So in some ways, it is connected to the rhythm of the work as ideas form and they start telling you where that needs to go. And in some ways, it also is directed by my own emotional state of when I'm coming up with what I'm doing. Is that helpful? Is that the first? Yeah. And the second one is how do I approach, yeah? I think the magic of photography lies in its inexplicable nature, meaning that imagine if you go out and you want to go and have a good time. So you go out to a bar or to a club or to a festival, but you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know who you're going to meet. You don't know how you're going to get there. You don't know what you might be doing. You don't know what it even looks like. You don't know what music's going to play. You don't know how you're going to dance. There's so many things you don't know. And yet, your most amazing times happen because you made one simple choice. You chose to go. And you chose to stay. You chose to speak. You chose to share. Choice is how I approach people. I try to measure the choice of what is happening versus the idea of what I am witnessing and say, okay, what does this mean to photograph this? Not, do I speak to this person or not? I'll speak to anyone. I'll get kicked out of anywhere. Like that part is not, I mean, for good or ill, that's not necessarily the boundary for how I interact when I photograph. What I'm oftentimes considering is how and what is the essence of this? What is its meaning? What does it mean if I photograph it? So when I approach someone, it will tell me how to approach. It will tell me what it needs. It will tell me I need to spend 3 days coming back and back and back because I can feel that this person feels uncomfortable with me. So I need to respect that. I need to come back and show them who I am. And then maybe on the second day, they might ask me where I am from. And on the third day, and on the fourth, and soon you realize you've organically, through the human element, created the pathway for human connection. So it's never going to be one thing, but I will say I try to not, Lawrence, I try to not imagine I control it. I don't. I try to figure out what is the rhythm, how do I respond to this, what is fair, what gives a person dignity, and what does the photograph mean? And if I can say all of those, if I can answer all of those questions internally in the moment that is happening, well, guess what? It might be worth sticking around for. If I can't, then maybe I should go for a walk and figure it out. And if I still can't after the walk, well, maybe I'm not the photographer. Maybe that photograph is not me. But at least in the process of doing that, I have a level of honesty in achieving it. And this is kind of the metric in which I choose both. One needs to be organic to the subject matter, and the other one needs to kind of feel organic to the nature of what I'm doing.
Can I a follow-up question to this one? While I was looking at your pictures, and again, they're beautiful, they're poetic, but they speak of a very harsh reality. I think you called it the tragedy of beauty. Very beautiful term, by the way. But how do you deal with this as a photographer on a personal level? How can you deal with so much reality? Is it, I don't know, like a nurse or a doctor gets a certain professional distance to topics, otherwise they affect too much? And how does that work for a documentary photographer who goes to areas or zones of crisis, of such existential human crisis? How do you deal with so much reality?
It's a good question. I'm going to take a moment to think about it.
Yeah.
A nice awkward moment.
Oh, that's a good one. But a gap filler we can do. Who has an easy one? Yes, God, there's always these questions. Number 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
Thank you for the powerful presentation.
Thank you.
Has there been ambivalence in your professional work? Has there been commissions or people that approached you for projects or paid work and stuff that you had to decline or wanted to decline or couldn't decline?
What's your name?
Yildiz.
There's always going to be things that you have to do that you don't want to do. Yeah. And I think perhaps 10 years ago, I felt more threatened by that idea that somebody might want me to do or photograph or make something that I did not truly care about or feel. And in many ways, if I'm being honest, I'm not fully escaped that feeling. It feels very personal when you express yourself through something that somebody else might have demands, desires, or try to control it, or in some ways make you beholden to them in your expression. I don't think I have the exact answer of how to manage that. I can say that one thing helped me, is that I tried to remember that I try, this is the key word, that it is the playfulness of the photographic act to take things that are serious and treat them with humor. And to take things that are humorous and to interrogate them with a serious mind. To invert, to show a level of irreverence to anything that you photograph. So even if I have to photograph or have photographed or been compromised to photograph, like any human being that's ever picked up a camera, I try to remember what's in here that I can actually learn from. What's in here? If I have that emotional vision, what's in this experience that I can take away from it? And sometimes it's nothing, and sometimes there is something. And if I resisted it, I would have missed it. So it's a. I don't think there's a final answer for it. You just kind of have to deal with that on a case-by-case basis. But I really think not everyone can say everything that might on its surface appear like you're sacrificing something of your artistic merit or your vision might end up that way. It might start that way, and in it you realize, oh, I just met a profoundly interesting person. So it's not always about the photograph, but it is always about life. And I try to be able to balance that scale so that I walk away with something that I learned rather than something that I got. Does that help? Okay.
And then there's two follow-up questions, one row after the other.
Hi, this is Valentin.
Nice to meet you, Valentin.
The presentation was really interesting. Incredible how complex it was, honestly. Big props to it, because I work in climate and it's difficult sometimes to narrate about it. What do you believe we need to do to amplify the impact of environmental photography?
Great question. Absolutely great question. Amplify impact. Okay, let's break that down really quickly, right? The conversation that we're having across all mediums about climate has a few complications. I would say more than we have time today to address. But one that I really enjoyed hearing is from a writer named David Wallace Wells, who wrote The Uninhabitable Earth, a fantastic book that I was given, I think, while I was doing the Arctic work. And it was a really revelatory book. But inside, he breaks down a few different issues we're facing. And one of them is how we communicate about climate. And there's something that I found to be particularly useful, is that we are speaking as though we are not in a crisis moment. We say the climate change, not climate crisis. We think that these things are happening elsewhere, that they might not visit us, but they're visiting us last week in New York City. They are visiting upon us in Germany. We are in far over our heads. So in order to meet that reality from the communication model that we are currently using, which is rather passive, like we are speaking about this in very lovely terms. I'm speaking about magazine or editorial conversations about climate, we're speaking as though we have room in that magazine for anything else, when that is indicative of our lack of understanding to the problem. We don't have room in the rest of the magazine for anything else. We have to change that. And it's not that we need to make people upset and scared, but what we need to do is imagine the tiers of information we can deliver and help people and enable them to address in their locality a way in which to respond to that information. So in answer to your question, how do we amplify impact? I would change that around a little bit and say, we need to readdress and understand that we are beyond a conversation about whether this is happening. We are beyond small measures. We are up Schitt's Creek without a paddle. And when we want to amplify the impact of that message, we have to imagine that it needs to be something wondrous. It needs to be something that makes someone not just upset or worried, but makes that 10-year-old kid understand that when they put plastic into this, or when they buy this scooter, that it has meaning. And that 10-year-old needs to be communicated as just as much as that 15-year-old in another model, and that 20-year-old, and that 30, and so on. It needs to be relevant to the experiences of people in the environment in which their impact is performed. That requires more complex communication models. That might mean that if it's photography, why not have experiential photography? Why not have, take other art forms that are near to photography, cinema, multimedia, VR, whatever, and start imagining that you can make one experience about one idea, one thing, not a gallery of things, but just one thing. What does it feel like to look at a redwood? Because if you can show someone how beautiful it is to look at a redwood, but also what matters when you preserve it, and what that seed does, and how to cultivate that seed next to that, that little VR thing of the redwood, and then you are encapsulating a full-bodied experience that can make that 10-year-old, 15, 20-year-old engage more as an inclusive and interactive way, amplifying the impact through participation, so that they can then go out into their lives and affect change. But if we only imagine it as a frame on a wall in a gallery accessible to the middle class or to the affluent or people from our area of the world, then we are far, far misunderstanding the problem. So I think in summation, there's a lot we can do, but it requires money and vision and a lot of people that care to go down, blaze these trails. But it's beyond possible. It's just that we are just thinking of solutions that are just disappointingly banal. A frame on a wall, come on. We could do more. You go to that beautiful, there was a brilliant, I think at MoMA, this brilliant installation some years ago, where people could come in and it was raining in this dark room. I forget the artist, but perhaps I can Google that for you. But you can go in, and everywhere you go, the motion sensors move so that you can move through a rain and not be touched. Brilliant. Why can't we do that when we explain to people what a monsoon feels like? But the fact that we don't think of that, and we only think of a page of a magazine, shows us that we misunderstand the problem far, 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 far back. So that would be my short answer.
Thank you. And the follow-up question.
First of all, wow, it was amazing. Thanks so much. So I was just wondering, why didn't you want to publish some of your photographs? I mean, they were, yes, disturbing, but also really highly influential and thought-provoking. So I was just wondering why you don't want to publish them.
Why I don't?
Yeah.
What's your name?
Second.
Nice to meet you. This is kind of hard to get blinded by anything, so I'm just trying to personalize the silhouettes. Why I don't want to publish? Is that? It's not that I don't want to publish. I would say, perhaps I miscommunicated that. It's not that I don't want to publish. It's that I just feel that we are on the cusp of so much opportunity in what we can achieve in our world, just as much as we are on the precipice of disaster. They are not mutually exclusive. They're tied together. So I just don't see, in many ways, a desire in my own industry to innovate to the degree in which I believe it could. I would love for that to be not the case.
And there's another question here.
Quite fitting for what you said. I discovered you through the first part of water, which are the landscape, lots of layers of meaning, and I really like the work because it's a fresh view on a big problem. And the second part you didn't publish yet. It's more old school. I think the pictures look more like Sagado or Nachtway. And I asked why did you change the approach? The second part is much more explicit. And, much more violence in it.
What's your name?
Yeah.
Yeah, cheers, Jan. It's a great question. I changed it because when you make something and reach a certain plateau, you must change and evolve to reach the next one. And sometimes that means not changing dramatically something that doesn't need to be changed, and in some ways experimenting in another area. So to be more specific, to break that down, I wanted to look at my photographs and strip them down from everything that I was used to. I didn't want to rely on the tools that I had become used to using. I didn't want to look at them in the same way. In many ways, I wanted to deprive the viewer of the softness and the dream quality of the colors and the structure of the first work. I wanted to almost work against myself. I wanted to look at all the things I felt that I did not like, and I think every photographer that you'll ever meet in your life, it probably dislikes their work more than you. It's a very interesting psychological process that goes on. You're very critical of your own creations, and I definitely am. And I looked at it and I thought, I don't want someone to walk away and feel good in the second chapter. I want someone to walk away and feel upset. And I'm sorry, it's not that I feel mean-spirited about that. I don't want actually to make you feel bad, but I want you to be upset about some of these things, because we should be upset. We shouldn't just only look at bad topics and say, well, if it was only said in a nice way. I think the second piece is in some ways the least photographic piece to me, but it's the most literal in some way. Not literal is perhaps a terrible word to use for your own work, but it's like I feel like it's more about my emotional perspective of the problem and less so about any expression photographically beyond that. I want someone to look at it, see it, process it, and realize, I do not like that. I do not like that is happening. That's the message of the whole second piece, regardless of its individual narratives. It's that feeling. And feeling, for me, is ultimately the only thing in photography I care about. It's the metric I judge all my work by. Even if I look at it and I'm like, it's a little bit off, or the composition, all the things that I prefer, I look at it and says, does it have feeling? If it has feeling, then it's a photograph. If it doesn't, it's just an image. It just looks like something. And there's plenty of images in the world, and they do not need me to contribute to that. So this is the metric I used in order to judge the second piece. Does it have that? And if it does, it's a part of that. If it doesn't, it lives in another area. And like all books, there's different chapters for different parts of the story. Make sense?
Very nice distinction. To me, it made a lot of sense. So maybe two more questions, one over here. And speak up very loud.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
I think just for the recording, I think it's very blinding, but we should put the hand down, otherwise we won't
You don't want this. You don't want this in the recording.
So please.
Of course.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for sharing your images. They were so captivating. I wanted to ask if specifically, I have so many questions for you, but I wanted to ask specifically of the time when you were still living in New York City before kind of setting off on this path of being a photographer and going out into the world. Were there any other career paths that you were thinking of, and ultimately, what was the thing that pushed you forward into going out and living abroad and following this path?
Thank you. What's your name?
Danny?
Cheers, Danny. Okay, so when I was younger, I really think this is perhaps the insecurity of why I travel around so much. It's not because I just want to travel, it's because I actually wanted to be a pilot. and this is like kind of like as close to like when I'm getting like like in Alaska or in Amazon or whatever, I get to go up in helicopters and fly in planes. I get into the cockpit and I look at them, I'm like, you guys are so cool. So like I truly, I think that was, as a little boy until even this conversation, it is the one thing that I just find to be most magical, the feeling of flight. And I learned how to fly when I was younger, and this was something that meant a lot to me, but it didn't mean as much to me in the sense of what I could offer. So learning to fly was super important, but it was really only about me. And I didn't really see anything that came after that. And at the time that I was learning this, like between 16 and 19, I realized that like I had so many questions about what was happening to my own country. I grew up and came of age after 9/11. So I was seeing my older brother go off to war. I was seeing my friends go off to war. I was seeing my country change. I was figuring out what these things meant to me and to my fellow Americans. And I thought, I can't just put my head down and do things for myself. Like, what is this other feeling that I have about belonging and about exploring the world that is tied to aviation, but is also tied to identity? It's also tied to this feeling of wanting to break out of where I came from and go on road trips and go explore. And so when I came across photography, it was so fortuitous because I was at this cross-section where I could go left and follow something that would be self-serving and beautiful, and who knows, maybe I would have arrived here anyway, or I could do this other thing that had like a big question mark over it, and that I didn't go to school for photography, I taught myself in bookstores, but it did give me this feeling of empowerment. It made me feel like I mattered. I could say something about what was happening around me. I could point the camera at a stranger and say, you matter. And I thought, that's real power. Not just moving around something in the sky, but moving something inside of someone. And this is where I set off. And I used a road trip. I left home, packed a car. I didn't have much money, so I worked some odd jobs, but I drove around. I just went around all across the States until I figured out why I needed to come back. And when I came back, I knew that I was a photographer. Not because I had actual photographs. I had terrible photographs, really bad. But I knew something about myself. And what I had was the self-confidence to say, if I stop at that gas station, or I meet these kids on a dirt bike, or I'm working at a furniture store and I realize this person has a story, that I have the capacity, I have the humanity in which to express it and to reflect upon it. And that right there is like, I think if you don't have that and you just have skill in a camera, you're a camera operator. But if you have that, I think that's a starting point from which to ask a lot of questions of everything around you. Is that all right?
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.
All beautiful questions, by the way, guys, and fantastic answers. So I would have space for one more question if you want. Is there another question in the room? Yes, there's one more.
First, thank you for the really nice presentation, and maybe also according to her question, was it a long and a hard way to make the passion about photography your job and making money out of it? Because I've heard from a lot of people also seeing photographers and stuff that it can be tough times where you have to do another side job or something because they didn't get any jobs or something.
So your question is, am I broke? And the answer is, of course. So any photographer that has money, I'd love to meet them. Love to meet them. But no, sorry. Go ahead. Please finish. Excuse me.
I'm studying music, so it's going through the same struggle, I guess.
I've borrowed money from my friends that are musicians. So I'm just saying, there is a descending scale, and you're not the bottom of it. But is that your question? How is it economically viable, or is it?
No, just
how do you manage that?
If it has been a long way and a lot of struggles and these moments where you were thinking about quitting or something or doing something else and just keeping it as a hobby or something like that.
It's a great question. Remind me of your name, please.
Mathis.
Cheers, Mathis. It has always been a struggle. It has always been a struggle. even when I've been awarded and even when I've had money, it's been another type of struggle. The nature of putting yourself on a limb to do something that you both care about, but that also exists in a world where you have to figure out how to make it work, is that at some point there will be a struggle, even if it's not financial. And I would say the times where I was not struggling financially were actually the most difficult times for me creatively. So I'll say that again. When I had money, I photographed like shit. Let me just say it that way. And that is something that I had to learn about who I was, meaning that I come from the road trip. I come from developing my film at Walgreens. I come from borrowing this to pay that. I come from hustling. And I need that feeling of hustle in order to remind myself to stay sharp. That's not exactly the healthiest thing. And I'm going to finish with your question, by the way, because I really want to make this full circle. But the struggle is always there, and financial struggle, mate, is one form of that. The second part is, have I wanted to give up? Yeah. I've wanted to give up a lot. And a lot of these photographs that you saw, there's moments like this. There's even a photograph from the Arctic where you're like that literal walk was me feeling like I wanted to give up. So, but you just don't. You just don't. You just keep going. Like I'm not a runner. I'm not like. I watched like one half of an Amy Winehouse documentary, and she said something really hilarious. Where she said like, when they asked her like, when are you gonna put out new? By the way, I'm not comparing myself with Amy Winehouse. I just realized I just caught myself. Excuse me. But she said something amazing. All right, that's what I want to get at. She said something like, "All right, when are you gonna release a new album?" She was being interviewed, and she's just absolutely brilliant. And she's like, "When are people gonna understand that like I'm only good for music? You know, like this is the only thing I'm good for. Just let me go make music, and I'll do it. Give me time." And I kind of, when I imagine the question you mentioned, like struggle, passion into money, turn it into a hobby maybe, I wish I had that as a choice. That's not on the table for me. I have one use, I believe, to give the world, and that is to try to do something that I give a shit about and make it about all of us. And that's what I struggle with day after day after day. And maybe in a year from now, I'll have a better answer. Maybe in 10 years, I'll be a pilot, and I'll realize there's so much more money in that. But I do know that if I'm honest with myself in what I create and what I give my time to, and people that I photograph, places I come to, things that I do, then I will be rewarded richly by life. And that doesn't mean that it's going to come in money. It will come in ways that, Richard Avedon, I never met him, never even had I couldn't even afford a photo book of his. And to this day, I will not own a photo book of his in my home. You can't own magic. But he lived a life of incredible artistic merit, and he made a young boy from Brooklyn believe that he could do something. Now I mentioned about how I believe caring is cool. That's my general message about whatever you're doing. If you realize that someone can make you do that, then you have the responsibility to recognize that what you do can have that for somebody else. So the struggle is real, yeah. Money comes and goes. But I can say there's no amount of money that can give a person the satisfaction and fulfillment that comes through purpose in life. And anyone that chases money for that will soon learn that eventually. But the person who is enriched by everything else along the way and is able to also pay their bills from time to time, they will realize that they are living as close to life as honestly as possible. And I believe that's what photography means to me. And I want to answer your question before I go.
Actually, I have to insert before you answer.
Shit.
We start off the struggle is real. Yes, the struggle is real. It doesn't matter what level, what age, whatever. If in this field, everyone, for the precarious work field that you're entering, being in the art university, struggle is real. But actually, a photographer friend of mine from New York, Jonathan Mannion, he worked with Eviden, and he said another thing, also a very accomplished photographer. He said, nobody is immune to the hustle. And that's a nice one too, that I had to think of Alvedon, hustle, etc. So nobody's immune to the hustle. That's a very wise word too. But sorry, yeah, you were owing me an answer to my first question.
I want to actually add something to that.
Yeah.
It's really cool. I'd love to meet him, by the way. I think it was my friend, it might have been my friend Philip. He's an amazing photographer, Philip Montgomery. He just did a book. I'm plugging his book. He did a book on the fractured state of America in black and white. He's shot for the New York Times Magazine, New Yorker, et cetera, et cetera. I've known him since we were both broke photographers in New York. And he is by far an amazing photographer. And I remember one time, I think I might have been borrowing money from him, or he was consoling me in a difficult spot, you know, when you're struggling. And he told me something along the lines of, like, talent, it doesn't matter. Talent doesn't matter. Just work harder. If you're working hard, work harder than hard. If you care about it and you give a shit about it, then stay up late, wake up early. Have it challenged by people that are around you. And he didn't say all of that stuff. I'm spitballing. But he told me to, like, suck it up, essentially. And I did. But I want to answer your question, and then I'm going to let you guys go, if that's all right.
Yeah.
How to deal, you asked a really good question, and I needed to spend some time answering it, thinking about it, excuse me. How to deal with the emotional weight of spending your time looking at things that are, in some ways, very serious and very real. I will I'm going to kind of change the narrative a little bit. We are all the time dealing with that. When we leave here, there's a problem in each of our lives that we have to address or that is important to us. And maybe the outside world does not see that, but we feel it and we deal with it. And that is the truth of existence. I really believe that every person has something to teach you, and every person has an inner world that you can never possibly imagine. And if you go around remembering that, then that person that, like, you know, spills coffee on you and doesn't say sorry suddenly doesn't become just a person that spills coffee on you and doesn't say sorry. They're a real human being, and you can perhaps express some level of connection and kindness and understanding, and therefore display your humanity to yourself. It's always been a huge weight on me to feel like I cannot ignore the things that upset me and that I wish to document. It's a different type of feeling for me. It is not that looking at it or being there makes me come back here and realize everything is okay here, and that I don't have that central problem of life, and this one is going to be the one that makes me feel bad, because it's not about me. And in this way, it's a different equation. What it is that I feel oftentimes melancholic, and I would say I struggle emotionally the most with the feeling that I wish I could not obsess about it, that I want to go back and want to work on more. Not as an obsession because it gives me an adrenaline kick. There's no adrenaline out of this, you know. What it is that I can't ignore it. And I really wish I could, because then I would probably not have to answer the question about whether I'm broke. You know, like I'm sure that I could apply my energy to something else. But I can't, and I don't want to. And I believe that the cost of it, I believe the cost of being given by whatever chance I've had at being slightly sensitive to the way things look and appear, whatever that is, that I should apply all the hard work and time I can into fostering that and giving it purpose. And if it means that I have to spend a lifetime dealing with the difficulty of that, well, that is my service to my fellow human being. And in some way, that's something I can be. That kid that wanted to be a pilot, maybe he thinks that's cool.
Beautiful advice. Okay, to wrap this up, quick takeaways. You know this new exercise that I'm trying since a couple of weeks? Quick takeaways. Who goes first? Random. Notes on the table. Takeaway. Just do it. This corner. Caring is cool. Yes. Everything you do matters. Wonderful. Give me two more. Come. Yes?
Sometimes the easiest way is internally the hardest.
Sometimes, repeat this again. This was dope.
Sometimes the easiest way through life internally is the hardest.
Very good one. Final one. Here, see this corner. Look at you. Every person has something to teach you. Well, that's some beautiful takeaways for the first round of takeaways. Mine was actually, you said something, I think you quoted C.G. Jung, in your weakness is your project.
Yeah, I think
That's
it's a
deep.
paraphrase. I believe I'm slightly off.
It
but
doesn't
it's something
matter.
like this.
Everything is paraphrased. But in your weakness is your project. It's a beautiful thought to take with you. Like the stuff where it hurts, where you feel weak, where you don't feel confident, that's your project.
That's what you work on.
Say that? Say that.
Be candle
in your own field. Yeah. So there's a lot of takeaways. So first of all, one applause. We give two. But first one. And I'm not letting you go yet. Yeah. You have another round. You have to do it again. Now, because you have always the final question, you kind of gave so much advice, it's almost obsolete to ask it again. But if you have one last piece of advice for this mixed bag of students at the University of Arts, what would that be?
If you have the chance to be kind to someone, take it.
Yes. So now you can go. Thank you so much, Mustafah. Thank you so much.